The day my grandfather, William Langston, died, everything changed for me, though nobody else knew it yet. I was sitting in my little apartment, the one with the creaky floors and the window that never shut exactly when the mail came. It was just a normal envelope, yet it seemed heavy in my palms, like it carried more than just paper. Inside was a note from him, scrawled in his untidy handwriting that I'd always adored as a kid. "Mason," it stated, "I'm gone now, but I'm giving you everything. $150 million in assets, residences, and buildings all throughout Europe and Asia, and significant shares in companies you've probably never heard of. It's yours. But listen to this. People show their true selves when they believe you have nothing. Keep it secret until the time is right." I was 27 years old, and those words hit me hard. $150 million, as it didn't seem real. I folded the letter up, my fingers shaking a bit, and placed it into the rusted lockbox under my bed. I didn't tell a soul. Not my wife, Clarissa, not her fancy mother, Evelyn, not her useless brother, Dean. Nobody. They already had me figured out. Mason Clark, the guy who could barely pay the bills, the husband who limped along behind their ideal family. I decided to let them keep thinking that. For now. Clarissa was out that day, possibly at her mom's enormous house, the one they called their legacy. I could imagine her there, sitting with Evelyn drinking tea from those lovely cups they liked so much. Evelyn would be going on about Dean again, about how he was going to achieve something amazing one day, even though he'd never done much of anything. Me? I was the man they rolled their eyes at. The one who drove an ancient car with a dented door and worked a monotonous job pushing boxes around. They didn't realize that job didn't matter anymore. They didn't realize I had just become richer than all of them put together. That night, Clarissa arrived home, her heels clicking on the floor. When she walked in, she smelled like expensive perfume, the kind I had never bought her. "Mason," she said, not even looking at me. "You need to get Dean up tomorrow. He's traveling back from some trip." Her voice was shrill, like I was a child who needed instructions. "Okay," I answered, keeping my tone light, like always. She didn't ask how my day was. She didn't notice I'd been quiet, staring at the wall, trying to wrap my head around what I had just read. She didn't care. To her, I was still the same old Mason. Nothing special. Nothing worth asking about. The next morning, I got into my beat-up sedan, the one Evelyn usually made a face at when I pulled up to their house. I drove to the airport to pick up Dean, the engine rattling the whole way. He came out of the terminal, looking like he thought he was famous, sunglasses on, even though the sky was gray. "Hey," he said, tossing his suitcase in the back and hopping in. "Dude, this car is a joke. You gotta get something better." I just grinned, my hands tightening on the wheel. "Maybe someday," I said, keeping things light. He didn't say thanks for the ride. He just leaned back and started talking about how his latest big crypto idea fell apart because nobody understood him. I nodded, pretending to listen. But my mind was on that letter. People show their true selves when they think you have nothing. Dean didn't have a clue. I could have handed him $1 million right then and walked away without blinking. But I didn't. I drove him to Evelyn's house. The one I had just found out was part of grandfather's inheritance, officially mine now. And I watched as he strutted up the steps like he was king of the world. He wasn't. I was. Later that night, Clarissa sat me down at our tiny kitchen table. The light above us buzzed like it always did, and she had her arms crossed tight. "Mom's worried about Dean," she said, like it was my job to fix it. "He needs some help getting started again. You've got that savings account. Maybe you could send him something?" I stared at her. Really looked. Her hair was perfect. Her nails bright and new, undoubtedly paid for with money I had shuffled through a company she didn't even know existed. "I have about 2,000 bucks saved," I said, slowly watching her face. Her eyes lit up for a second. "That's something," she said. "It's not a lot, but it could help. Dean has big plans." I almost laughed. Big plans? Dean couldn't plan his way out of bed most days. "I'll think about it," I said, keeping my voice cool. She frowned, but she didn't press me. She didn't ask why I'd been acting strange. Didn't wonder what was going on inside my head. To her, I was just Mason. The man who didn't mean much. I let her think that. Grandfather's words kept running through my mind. People show their true selves when they think you have nothing. And I was seeing it now. Clarissa, Evelyn, Dean. They didn't care about me. They never had. They only cared about what I could provide them. And they thought I had nothing to give. The days after that letter felt like I was living a lie. But I wasn't ready to end it yet. I went to my job at the warehouse, pushing boxes around like I still needed the paycheck. At night, I locked my door and pulled out the paperwork Grandfather left me. Lists of homes, bank accounts, company shares. It was a lot to take in, but it was mine. Clarissa would come home, complaining about her family, not knowing I was sitting on a fortune that could shut them all up. One night, she sighed and said, "Dean has this new idea." She was flipping through some magazine. "Mom thinks it's going to be huge." I sipped my coffee and nodded. "Sounds great," even though I didn't mean it. She didn't hear the edge in my voice. She didn't know I was already planning, already watching them closer than they had ever watched me. They thought I was nothing. Soon they'd know I was everything, but not yet. For now, I'd stay quiet, keep playing along. The letter wasn't just about money. It was a map, and I was following it, step by step. They would show me who they really were. And when they did, I'd be ready. And the sun was just peeking through the shutters, casting thin patterns on the aged carpet. Clarissa grumbled from the bedroom, pulling the blanket over her head like she could filter away the noise. I rubbed my eyes, forced myself out of the recliner where I'd fallen asleep looking at Langston Holdings' papers, and went to the door. I didn't even get it all the way open when Evelyn burst in, her face scarlet, her hair wild, like she'd run straight from her luxurious mansion to my dilapidated place. "Mason!" she shrieked, her voice harsh enough to rouse the neighbors. "There's been a mistake, a dreadful mistake. The bank says the house is going into foreclosure. Default. Do you even know what that implies?" She paced the tiny living room, her heels tapping hard on the floor. I stood there, still half asleep, watching her unravel. "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It implies they're taking the house since you didn't pay." She stopped pacing and gazed at me, her mouth open like I'd slapped her. Clarissa stumbled out of the bedroom then, her hair a tangled mess, throwing a robe over herself. "What's going on?" she asked, staring at her mom. Evelyn threw her hands up. "The house, Clarissa, our home. They're saying we're losing it, and I don't see how this could happen." She turned back to me, her eyes narrowing. "Mason, you've had to have something put away, don't you? Some little savings hoard? We need aid. This is an emergency." I leaned against the wall, crossed my arms, letting her words hang there for a second. Clarissa drew closer, her voice lower but just as aggressive. "Yeah, Mason, you don't contribute much anyway, but if you've got anything, now's the time." I glanced at them, Evelyn, all puffed out with fear, and Clarissa, acting like I owed them something. "I've got approximately 2,000 bucks. Saved," I said, slow and cool, observing their faces. Evelyn's nose screwed up like I'd offered her a handful of mud. 2,000? "That's it?" she snapped. "That won't even pay the lawyer bills." I didn't move, didn't flinch. "It's what I've got," I replied, shrugging a little. Evelyn huffed, turning to Clarissa like I wasn't even there. "Can you believe this? After everything we've done for him, he has $2,000 to his name?" Clarissa nodded, her lips tight. "Mom's right, Mason. Dean's success depends on our family looking well. We can't lose the house. It's all—" I tilted my head, letting a little edge come into my voice. "And what about me? Does my appearance ever matter to you?" The room became quiet. Evelyn paused, her hands halfway to her hips. Clarissa glanced at me like she didn't know what to say. Neither of them responded. They simply stood there, staring like I'd asked something stupid. I let the silence extend, feeling it press against them. They didn't have a reply because they'd never thought about it. To them, I was just the man who drove the car, paid the small bills, took their orders. My image? That didn't even cross their minds. Evelyn broke the quiet first, shaking her head. "This isn't about you, Mason," she said, her tone sharp again. "This is about the family, our legacy. You wouldn't understand." She turned back to Clarissa. "We'll figure something out. Maybe Graham can call the bank, or Dean can talk to some of his investor buddies."